Good morning, everyone. How are you? It's a great Wednesday. I believe it's Wednesday. Yes, it is Wednesday. We're going to give our attendees another minute or so to check in. Good morning, Mark Samuel. Good morning, Rosane. All right, let's begin. So thank you for coming back to Pivot Week and joining us on this Wednesday. Today, we are going to be talking about building sustainable communities. You know, the past 2 days, we've talked about how to improve our self-care, take care of our mental health, expand our business practices and our business wellness. Well, today we have another treat for you. We're going to talk about how to build sustainable communities, and we've got a great lineup of speakers. We have just a slight change in our speaker lineup today. We will have 3 speakers today instead of 4. And we're going to start today with Julio Malera. Julio is president of the Baton Rouge Business Report. He is the son of Honduran immigrants and is the CEO of Malera Enterprises, a multimedia company which publishes the Greater Baton Rouge Business Report, 225 magazine, Register magazine, Daily Report online, and 1012 Industry Report. They also produce the Baton Rouge Business Awards and Hall of Fame, influential business women in business, the Louisiana Business Symposium, and 40 Under 40. Julio is also the founder of Business Report's Executive Leadership Academy, an exclusive program for advancing professionals, small business owners, and entrepreneurs that offers the best personal development, professional growth, leadership exposure, and insight from guest CEO speakers. So we do have such a treat today. So let's get started. Julio, I'm going to control your presentation. So please just let me know when you're ready to move on to the next slide.
Awesome. Well, good morning, everybody. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And you can go to the first slide, just open it up there. And I want to spend a few moments to talk about your leadership journey. It's so important, right? There's 2 facets to leadership. One is leading people, which we'll have to do if we have families, if we have an organization, we run a department, we run a company. But the other facet of leadership is leading yourself. And that's where I'm going to hone in today. And specifically, I want to drill down on your own personal journey from good to great, because in today's world, good is not good enough. And there's greatness inside of you. But we got to work at developing and watering and cultivating the seeds that are inside of us so we can be the best version of ourselves. And so I want to begin with the end in mind. And let me tell you what I mean by that is that it's so important to understand the why, our purpose, why we're here, why we do what we do every single day. I tell young people all the time that if you only work for money, you never have any. You have to have purpose. You have to have passion. And so for all of us here, at the end of our lives will be defined by 3 things. If you can go to the first slide, please. Next slide. So the 3 areas that are going to define your life and my life at the end. Next slide, please. The first one is our stewardship, our relationships, and the next one, and our leadership. And let me just unpack those real quickly, because I think it'll set the stage for what I want to share in the next few moments. Click to the next one. When I say the word stewardship, I'm talking about, if you can click the next 3 ones, please. I'm talking about your faithfulness, how you oversee your duties, how you conduct your affairs. Is it with excellence? Is it with faithfulness? Is it with integrity, right? I meet a lot of people that want bigger contracts, but they're not faithful with the current contracts. I see people that want bigger assignments, but they're not faithful with the current assignment. So a good question to us right now is, am I being a good steward of the people that I lead, of my family, right? Of the gifts and talents that God has given me? It's a good question to ask ourselves, because again, stewardship is an important part of our lives. The second facet is relationships. If you can go to the next one, right? And relationships are just like real estate, right? Real estate's all about location, location, location. Relationships all about communication, 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 right? I'm talking about growing and developing and cultivating long-term relationships. Every resource that you and I will ever need in life is found in our relationships, right? If you need a loan, you need a relationship. If you need some wisdom, you need a relationship. If you love, relationship. Everything, life, business revolves around relationships. And so the question for us to ask ourselves today as we do some self-reflection is, how are we doing in this area? But here's really what I want to park. And this is really our conversation today. If you can go to the next slide, it's about leadership. And leadership is about three things. It's about our character, about our competency, and about our influence. I'll say it again, our character, our competency, and influence, right? And so we've got to make sure that we're honed in on these three, right, to maximize our ability to lead our organizations, to lead our lives, right? Because the truth of the matter is that no matter what your title is, your company or maybe your business or your boss may give you a title, but people decide if you're a leader. And that's based on your character, your competency, your influence. But I want you to think about something for a moment. If you can go to the next slide. There are great world leaders, but no great world managers. You ever thought about that? And the reason why is that leading is a lot harder than managing people, right? And so what I want to do is I want to give you some food for thought. You know, one of the great tragedies in contemporary living today is that people do short-term thinking, and we need to program our lives. We need to program our business for long-term, right? And so I want to talk to you today, if you can go to the next slide, about your personal journey from good to great. Again, good is now the lowest standard you can have. It's not good enough to be good, a good leader. You know, I don't know of anybody that just wants to be a good athlete, a good communicator. You know, the goal should be great. And what I mean by great is you want to be elite. You want to be excellent. You want to be the best version of yourself and never settle, right? And so let me give you a little reference point to see if they resonate with you here for a moment. I want to show you a couple of people that were good, that never reached their greatness, never reached their full potential. And then I'm going to show you some people that were great. They finished strong. They reached their potential. And see if you agree. Let's go to the first slide. Do you recognize this person right here? Mr. Ken Lay, the CEO and chairman of Enron. You know, if you don't know, let me give you a quick tidbit of history. In the 1980s, they started with a small company, made a lot of acquisitions, started growing. By the late 1990s, they were the darling of Wall Street. If you read Fortune magazine or Forbes, they were all over the place. They were doing over 100 billion in revenue. But unfortunately, in the late 1990s, early 2000, something was discovered. They were cooking the books. They lacked integrity. And ladies and gentlemen, what could have been one of the greatest companies in the history of American business became the largest bankruptcy in the history of American business. They've ruined thousands of lives. People went to jail, and they no longer exist. This is a classic example of an organization that was good, that could have been great, but no longer exist. Go to this next one. How about these two people, the king of pop and the king of rock and roll, two of the greatest ever in the entertainment business. Unfortunately, one died at the tender age of 42, and the other one died at the age of 50. And I would tell you, for as marvelous and as great as they were, they never reached their full potential. They never finished strong. They short-circuited because of some bad decisions, right? Go next slide. How about this guy right here? You know, Lance Armstrong, 7-time winner of the Tour de France, the most grueling sporting event in the world. The problem is he was cheating. And today, his legacy is tainted. He never reached his full potential, right? He became an embarrassment. One person that could have been one of the greatest of all time, but he never finished strong. I'll give you one more. How about this guy right here? Pete Rose still has the record for the most hits, most games played, but you will never see him in the Hall of Fame in our lifetime because the guy was cheating, right? The lack of integrity. And look, I show you these people because they've been in the news and the media, but they resonate. And the point here is that none of these people that became, quote, famous or very good at their craft reached the level of greatness they could have. They all were short-circuited because they didn't program their lives for the long haul. But let me reverse engineer, right? Because I could keep going and going and going. I'll go to the next slide. Let me show you a couple of ones that were great. Go to the first slide here. How about these two guys, Sam Walton and Walt Disney? Look, I'm a biography buff, as you can probably pick up, and these are two guys that wanted to serve their country. As a matter of fact, Sam Walton did. He went to World War II. Walt Disney wanted to, but he was too young at the age of 16, and so he ended up driving ambulances. But they both had a dream. And after the war, Sam Walton came back from serving our country, fighting for our country, and he had a little idea. And his idea was this: he wanted to have access to quality products to the common folk for a good price point. That's how he started. That was the idea. And we know today the rest is history. His legacy still lives. And Mr. Walt Disney, obviously, he had a tough upbringing, but he wanted to use his imagination. He wanted to help people imagine and have experiences, right? They would take him out of the real world so they could enjoy their lives. And of course, his legacy still stands today. How about this next person right here? How about these three right here? You go to the next slide. Billy Graham, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa. Three people that gave their lives to serve humanity. And look, I'm a big quote buff. I've got tens and thousands of quotes from all three of these people. But one of my favorite when it comes to leadership, Mother Teresa used to say, God can't fill what's already full. So if you're full of bull, you're full of yourself and full of your own agenda. You can't be used as a reservoir, right, to lead others, right? The other one that I still love today, she used to say, if you're too busy to pray, you're too busy, right? And so, again, three people that ended their lives with purpose and dignity. Go to the next one. Next slide. How about Abraham Lincoln? Yes, I know he was the 16th president of the United States. Yes, I know that he ran for office and he failed, and 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 then he came back and he came back, right? He was the 16th president of the United States. He helped abolish slavery. But what most people don't understand about Abraham Lincoln is that he was just like you and I. He had a lot of personal challenges, a lot of struggles. He had a lot of obstacles to overcome. He fought depression. He lost 3 children under the age of 20, right? And he had a lot of personal tragedy, and yet became one of the greatest presidents. He actually died for the cause, right? His legacy lives on today. Let me give you 2 more, and I'll make my point here. Next slide. Here's the great legendary coach, John Wooden. I put him on here because not only he's the greatest basketball coach ever, 10 national championships, 4 undefeated seasons. We'll never see that in our lifetime. And I had the privilege of having dinner with him twice, and he just impacted my life. But his legacy is not so much on the basketball court, because if you talk to any player that ever played for him, is that he was a maker of men. He helped transform young men to real men. He helped develop them. And that's his legacy today. And I would tell you, he finished strong. He was one of the greatest ever. But look, I show you these people in the media because, again, they resonate with most people because they've seen them, read about them, they've had books and all that. But I'm here to tell you this morning, there's greatness all around you. As a matter of fact, one of the greatest people that I've ever met, she's not in the Hall of Fame. She's never been on the cover of a magazine. You won't see any publicity on her life, but it's this lady. Next slide. It's my mother, mi mama, one of the greatest women that I ever met. She passed away 10 years ago, but let me tell you, she came to this country, didn't know a lick of English. As a matter of fact, she learned English watching the Tonight Show. We caught the public transit system, my whole life. She didn't know how to drive till she was 38, but she sacrificed $13,000 a year to put us all through school. We never missed a meal, sacrifice, one of the greatest people ever to walk the planet. And I tell you this because there's greatness inside of you. The data shows it. The science shows that every single human being has what they call 3 to 5 areas of excellence. Some people call it talent. Some people call it a gift. You can call it whatever you want to call it, but there's seeds inside all of us. And the problem with most people that never finish strong or never reach their full potential is because they're not cultivating, they're not getting out of their comfort zone, they're not growing, right? They're not working at it, right? They become complacent. And so what I want to do over the next few moments is I want to give you 5 keys to greatness. And again, so that you and I are aligned and we're on the same page. I'm talking about becoming elite at what you do, whatever business you're in, whatever vocation, whatever purpose, whatever God's calling is in your life, to be the best version of yourself. That's what I'm challenging you to do today, to lead yourself to another level, because there's more inside of you. Next slide. So, next slide. I want to give you 5 keys. As I give you these keys, I want you to think to yourself. You go ahead and click one, and let me just park it right there. If you can click it. You got to, one is you got to elevate your thinking to elevate your leadership. So as I give you these 5 keys, I want you to think about this, because there's a lot of different people on this Zoom meeting, and you're from different backgrounds. You may do different things. So I want you to think about this. You know, you don't need 1,000 keys to open up a vault, right? You just need 1 key, right? The right key. And so as I share these 5 keys with you, I want you to ask yourself, am I doing that? Am I doing that? And if you're not, I want to encourage you and challenge you to start doing it. And if you are, I want you to ask yourself, to what degree? And am I very intentional, or I go in and out? And I want to encourage you to become disciplined, to put it on the forefront. Because again, like this first key, you got to elevate your thinking to elevate your leadership. It's all about, go to the next one. And this is extremely important, next slide, because it's about your mindset. Your mindset is the most important thing that you and I bring to the table, right? Every single day. And mindset is important because it impacts your attitude. A lot of people think mindset and attitude are the same thing, but they're not. Mindset is the way you and I see the world. And attitude is how you and I interact with the world according to how we see it. And the reason this is important, ladies and gentlemen, is that 80% of your success is based on your psychology. Or let me give it to you the way I tell my 3 kids. If you win the game on the inside, you'll win the game on the outside. And it's the exact same thing in business and in life today, right? And there's 3 types of mindsets that great leaders have, right? One is a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, right? A growth mindset is always looking to grow, right? Is always looking to expand, right? It says, hey, I'm content, right? I'm blessed where I am, but I'm not satisfied. I want to continue to evolve. I want to continue to grow as a father, as a husband, as a mother, as a leader, as a communicator, as a salesperson, as a teacher, at whatever your craft is, right? A fixed mindset says, hey, this is the way I was born. This is the way I am. This is the way it is. You want to have a growth mindset all the days of your life. Why is that, Julio? Very simple. Because you can never exhaust your capacity to grow. It's something you can do to the day you and I go to the grave. You got to have a growth mindset. Second is you got to have an abundance mindset as opposed to a lack mindset. I'm telling you, too many people have a lack mindset. You know, oh, I'm worried about the recession. Oh, I'm worried about the economy. Can I tell you something? I already told my team, I don't care if a recession comes. We're not participating, right? We're going to continue to give good customer service. We're going to continue to help our customers solve problems, right? This is America. My goodness, you know, I've been fortunate to travel to third world countries. I've taken my kids on mission trips. And every time I come back to America, America with all of its challenges and problems is still the greatest country on the earth. You just need to go to Africa, you need to go to Asia, you need to go to South America, you need to go to Latin America, and you'll find out this is still the land of abundance, the land of opportunity, right? But you got to have a plan, you got to have a purpose, you got to have good work ethic, right? All those fundamental things that we all know, right? And the third mindset is you got to have a positive mindset versus a negative mindset, right? You got to have a positive attitude versus a negative. I believe optimism is a competitive edge. You know, I drive my family and I drive my employees, I drive my customers crazy because I'm the most optimistic person that I know. And And the reason why is because the world is negative. The world is negative. I think that being optimistic is a competitive edge. And I know for a fact that having a positive attitude makes a huge difference in my daily life, in my daily work, and as I lead other people. If you can click, and this is why, click to the next slide, please. A positive mental attitude is determined by you and not others. That's the cool thing. You can't wait on your spouse or your children or your clients or your boss or whoever. You determine if you have a positive mental attitude. I never forget, in my 20s, I went to a conference, and I heard it was a motivational speaker, and the guy says, positive mental attitude is everything. He was wrong. What I discovered is that over the years is that you can have a positive mental attitude, but if you're incompetent, I'm going to fire you. But a positive mental attitude, while it's not everything, it is the most important thing that you and I bring to life, that you and I bring to work every single day. And it's something we got to work on every day, because I believe 90% of our world functions in a negative mode. Stop and think about the arrows of doubt and unbelief and negativity that hit our minds every single day. I tell people that sometimes tell me, Julio, I'm struggling. I'm fighting depression. I'm fighting getting. I said, do you watch the news? They go, yeah. I go, well, quit watching the news. I've not read a daily newspaper in 25 years, and I still know what's going on. I don't spend my time on the news, right? I want you to understand something. The average person, according to one research, has 40,000 thoughts a day. Think about that. The average person has 40,000 thoughts a day. That means even when you think you're not thinking, you're thinking, right? That's the reason people give the metaphor that the brain, the mind is just like a computer, right? It never goes off. And so 40,000 thoughts. The interesting thing about the study is that they found out that 80% of the thoughts that you and I think daily come from a negative bent. That means it's things that are never going to happen, right? Oh my God, I'm not going to close that deal. Oh my God, I'm going to be late to carpool, pick up my kids. Oh my God, I'm going to get caught in traffic. Oh my God, all this anxiety and worry, all this negative stuff. 80% of the thoughts that you and I think on a daily basis, she doesn't like me. Oh my God, what if this goes wrong? Is what we're bombarded with every day. So let me ask you a question. If we're bombarded with 40,000 thoughts a day and 80% of them are negative, do you think we ought to do something on a daily basis to combat that? And of course, the answer is yes. So check this out. I love what St. Paul said in ancient scripture. You know what he said? He said, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And what I believe he was saying, paraphrase, is don't let the junk, the negativity, the cynicism, the limitations of this world latch onto your mind, but constantly reprogram your mind. Feed it the right information, feed it the right education, because whatever comes in is really what goes out. If you win the game on the inside, you win the game on the outside. Think about it in this way. How much work does it take for your home or your work area, your office, to get cluttered and dusty? How much work does that take? Just do nothing, right? How much work does it take to get physically out of shape? Just do nothing, right? How much work does it take for your grass to get out of whack? Or how about this? For weeds to grow out of the garden? How much work does that take? Just do nothing and it happens. And I'm here to remind you today, the same thing with your mind. Left to its own, your mind will deteriorate. Think about it in these terms. There's two worlds. There's the world and its negativity, right? And so many things you and I can't control. And there's the world that you and I create every day. That's why let's control what we can control and don't worry about the things that we can't control. It's a great way to live. It's a great way to lead others. Remember, 3 mindsets: growth, abundance, and a positive mindset are difference makers. Go to the next slide. Here's number 2. I want you to recognize talent is a gift, but click again, greatness is a choice. Again, I mentioned earlier, the science, the data, not me. The science and data says there's 3 to 5 areas inside of you where you're gifted, you're talented. It's a seed, right? But talent is not enough, ladies and gentlemen. Talent is not enough. One of the greatest gifts my mother gave me, she knew my name was Julio. She made us talk Spanish in the house so we wouldn't forget. But she used to say 2 things over to me in Spanish. She said, son, in the world, when you go out there, there'll be people smarter than you. There'll be people with more education than you, people from higher socioeconomic. But there's two things you don't let anybody do. Don't ever let anybody outwork you or outlearn you. And today, that still serves me well. One of the greatest lessons, my mom gave me a lot of great lessons and a lot of great whoopings too. But it's a staple. And here's the deal, right? Talent is a gift, but grace of choice. If you can click if you can click the next slide, please. The big issue here is you have to believe. You have to believe. Why? Because every day we get those arrows of doubt and unbelief. You know, and look, I could spend about 30 minutes here, and I usually unpack this, but for the sake of time, I got to keep going. But I want you to understand that just because a seed of doubt, an arrow of doubt comes, doesn't mean it needs to stay there. And so you got to fight it off. And that's why it's important. What you're feeding your mind is extremely important, because there's three things. If you're going to have the level of success that you're looking for, there's three things you got to believe in. One is you got to believe in the company that you work for, the organization that you work for. Two, you got to believe in the product and service that you deliver every single day. And you know, over the years, I've discovered the majority of people don't have issues with those two as much as the third one. And the third one is you got to believe in yourself. You got to believe in yourself. Every day, you got to work on that aspect of your life. I want you to understand this morning, there's two times in the day that your mind is most open to absorb information. Its creative juices are working at optimum levels, and that's early in the morning or late at night. And so I would encourage you. I'm a morning guy. My wife's a night owl. But in the morning, first thing, you got to have great habits, you know, and you got to read something. You got to feed your mind with the right information. It could be something spiritual, it could be something inspirational, it could be something educational, it could be something motivational. But feed your mind. Do not allow your mind to watch or read the news to be the first thing, much less be the last thing that you do at nighttime. Because what happens is that the first thing and the last thing that you program into your mind every morning and every night is what's programmed into your subconscious. It's a difference maker. When you put these habits to work, it'll help you the next day. You would have laid a little foundation and you have a little mojo to get going the next day. You have to believe. Go to the next slide, please. Here's number three. I want you to understand that leadership must embody servanthood. Servanthood. My favorite Chinese proverb is this next one. Next slide, please. Is this. Can you go to the next slide, please? Is to serve is to lead, right? It was Martin Luther King said, you don't have to be great to serve, but you do have to serve to be great. The greatest leaders serve. The greatest leader that ever came to serve. And here's the problem. I know people talk about COVID, but there's a bigger epidemic. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's called the me-itis. Let me show it to you here real quickly. If I can give you a little. Here it is. Me. What about me, Julio? What can I get out of this company? What can I get out of this customer? It's all about me, Julio. What can I get about this friendship? What can I get out of this industry, this association, this relationship? It's about me, Julio. Me. Feed me. Are you familiar with people like that? That's all about me. They got the me-itis. But I remind people, right, that you got to bring it down a notch, right? You got to serve, right? You got to serve. It's about serving. It works like this, right? If you want a friend, you got to be one, right? If you want love, you got to give it away. If you want to have a great team, you got to be a great teammate, right? And if you want to be a leader in your company, in your industry, in the community, right? You learn to lead. It starts with serving others. I wish I would have understood this to the degree that I do today in my early 20s. But I got to tell you, if you want to get to the top of your industry, you got to raise your serve. How are you doing in this area of serving your customers, of serving your family, of serving your employees? The greatest leaders serve first. To serve is to lead. How are you doing in this area? Go to the next slide. Number 4, You've got to preserve and protect your integrity. Biggie, 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 biggie. This is so important. So important. And the reason I bring this up is because we're living in an age, particularly the new generations, they're looking for authenticity. They're not listening to anybody's words, but they're watching our actions. And we've got to make sure. My mother taught me that if you know what you stand for on the front end, then all of us are going to have gray areas in life, and you're going to have to make decisions. But if you know what you stand for on the front end, when you come across that temptation, when you come across that gray area, you'll make the right choice. People that don't have integrity don't have any followers, right? And we're all going to be found out, ladies and gentlemen. So you've got to know what you stand for, who you are, why you're here, and why you do what you do. You got to preserve your integrity. And I want to give you 3 things to think about as it relates to this. As a matter of fact, before we go to the next slide, I don't know if you're aware of how they built the Wall of China, right? The Great Wall of China is one of the wonders of the world. Well, if you do a little history, let me give it to you in 30 seconds, Cliff Notes. They built the Great Wall of China to protect themselves against the enemies that were trying to penetrate their land. And if you read history, it was doing pretty good for a while, right? But guess what happened? The attacks came, and the enemies came, and they didn't go over the wall. They didn't go under the wall. They didn't even go through the wall. When the enemy finally penetrated, what they did was they bribed a gatekeeper who had no integrity and was bought. And that's how the enemy penetrated their land and conquered their region. So go to the next slide. Got to preserve and protect your integrity. Next slide here. And why is this important? Integrity is the basis of trust, and all relations function on the basis of trust. If you don't have trust, if your people do not trust you, you will not lead, right? They will not take the journey. They will not hang in there in the tough time. But when you build that trust, right, they will follow you. They will go through a glass door for you. And here's another little tip that I learned years ago. We got to value character more than success. We've got to value character more than success. And let me tell you why I say this is that many times I just used to hire people because of their skill set, and I didn't pay enough attention to their character, to their integrity. And when I figured out years later, right, I learned the hard way. I have a lot of scars and I had a lot of mileage on my tires. What I figured out is that, my goodness, the majority of us, we hire people for what they can do, but we end up firing them for who they are. And so I've worked real hard on our culture. And so we use the law of 3. We interview people 3 times, 3 different ways. And I'm the 3rd one. And I don't even interview on skill sets because my managers do that. But I interview people based on their fit to fit our culture, because we have certain values in our organization, and maybe your values do not meet. And it's not that we are a bad company or maybe you're a bad person, but if our values don't align, then you can't be part of our team, right? It's just, you're just not a fit. So we've got to value character more than success. Slow down the hiring process, right? Because in the old days, I used to hire fast. If they were breathing, we needed people, but we took our time, and now we do just the opposite. As soon as we identify that it may be not a fit, we pull the trigger quickly, but we take our time. Our turnover ratio has improved dramatically because we took our time really making sure that this was a good fit, and we were just not basing it on skill sets, but also on their character and their values. And the last point here, you see here, your integrity is always going to be remembered longer than your product or service. People talk, ladies and gentlemen. I have a couple of different divisions, but the greatest piece of advertising is not in my magazine or digital or social media. It's word of mouth. And so people talk. And so when you have high integrity and there's high trust, people talk. When you have low integrity and no trust, people talk. And so you've got to remember that as you continue your leadership journey. Next slide, please. Lastly, you've got to work and live in the present. Click, please, as opposed to working and living in the past. And I bring this up today, ladies and gentlemen, because The future is coming faster than we think. And a lot of people personally and a lot of organizations as a team are still living in yesterday. And at the rate of speed, the way things are changing, the economy, technology, consumer behavior, we have to make sure that we're living and working in the present. And let me give you three aspects, that three traps that hold back companies, that hold back businesses from reaching their full potential. Let me give them to you here, because I usually do a personal piece on this and in a company one, but I'm just going to give you the company one right now because of time. If you can click. Check this out. These are three traps that keep us from changing. Number one, believing that yesterday's solutions will resolve today's problems, right? We can all go back to the Blockbuster example, right? They thought, late fees were baked into their budget, and they thought they were going to last forever, right? Until somebody got mad at those late fees, and that person ended up starting Netflix, right? So there's no Blockbuster, but they kept thinking that what was working today was going to work tomorrow. You got to stay on top of things, ladies and gentlemen. Or how about assuming that present trends will continue, right? We can go back to the Kodak example you guys have heard, right? The person that discovered the digital camera actually worked for Kodak, but Kodak was making so much money off the film, they didn't want to hear about the digital camera. So he took his toy, his invention, brought it somewhere else, and today Kodak is an irrelevant brand, right? Again, we got to be careful that we don't, as we're doing our business, as we're building our companies, that we're looking at trends and what's changing, right? AI and the blockchain, all these things that are coming down the pike. And lastly, neglecting the opportunities and possibilities offered by future change. Listen, a lot of people resist change. They freak out of change. And I want to remind you this morning, there's only three things you can do with change. You can fight it, you could ignore it, or you can embrace change. And all three of them have consequences. And let me give you an example. If you fight change in your life, I'm talking about personally and professionally, if you fight change, it's just a matter of time before you get discontented, before you get discouraged, maybe get depressed. You'll give up, right? If you ignore change and you're in business, I promise you, you'll be out of business in the next 2 years if you ignore change. Or you'll be passed up by a promotion if you don't continue to evolve in the current job that you're in. You have to continue to evolve and transform. But check this out. If you and I learn to embrace change and understand that as the seasons of life change, as the economy changes, as our children grow, evolve, and they change, we got to keep changing. If you learn to embrace change, then you're going to enjoy the journey. You're going to enjoy the journey. Think about this, right? I think about Books A Million. They neglected an opportunity offered by future change. I don't know if you're aware of this, but when the internet came online, Books A Million was continuing to build brick and mortar stores. And they knew they had to do something. And so they outsourced. They actually outsourced their online stuff to some little bitty company called Amazon. And that was the beginning of Amazon. Where's Books A Million today? And where's Amazon today, right? So we got to be aware, regardless of your vocation, regardless of your industry, education, maintenance, construction, plumbing, media, real estate, oil, gas, whatever it is, you got to keep looking at future trends. Click next, please. So it's time for action. Those are 5 keys that I went through pretty quickly, but I just wanted to spend a few moments to plant that seed, right? We use, I want to leave you on this note, and then maybe, I don't know if there are any questions, but years ago, I came up with a little code that we call TPE, right? Think, plan, execute. And what I realized is that we were very good at executing, right? Getting the job done. And we were pretty good planners, right? As we made plans. But what I realized is that we didn't take enough think time. And I want to remind you today, one of the most important exercises, one of the most important disciplines that you can have as a leader is your think time. In the absence of thoughtful, reflective thinking, we do shallow thinking. And if you're going to be creative, if you're going to be able to innovate, if you're going to be able to problem solve at the highest levels, you need your quiet time to think. I have think time every morning before I come to work. I think about the projects, I think about the problems, I think about the people, I think about the processes, I think about my day, right? And so I take time to think. Most people are in a rush, or they're spending their first couple of minutes on social media, which is bringing no value, right, to their lives or to their craft, to their vocation. So I want to encourage you, take time to think and continue to elevate your leadership and enjoy your journey. It's been my pleasure. And do we have any questions or anything I can help with?
What a wonderful presentation, Julio. Thank you. I'm actually inspired by all of that and the quotes. So I do have a question. You know, being at it, it's 2023 and we are living in a social media age. You know, do you have any thoughts or any advice on how we navigate through that? Because I know some of us can be consumed by social media.
Yeah, I think, you know, with the data starting to show, and I think in the next 3 to 5 years, there's going to be a lot of more research, but I think we have to limit our consumption of social media. It's a big distraction. You know, I heard somebody say, you know, one day that we're living in the most connected, unconnected time in the history of the world, right? Here we have social media, but we're having less conversations in person, right? And interacting. So I do think, and look, and I'm on it, right? I'm in the media world, and I use LinkedIn a lot because that impacts my business. But I also have an Instagram handle, have a Twitter handle, and it's a necessary. But again, like you're saying, you have to be disciplined, right? What I tell a lot of people, you know, nowadays is, look, you can have the pain of regret or the pain of discipline. I think if we get the pain of discipline, then we're going to get better outcomes that we're looking for in terms of time management, right? Because people say, I just don't have enough time, right? Well, many times it's not about time management anymore. I think it's about priority management. What is the priority, right, that we need to do? And then the other part of it in today's world, it's about attention management. What needs my attention at this time, as opposed to getting, like you said, sucked into the vortex like we all do. But it's tough. But again, if you get the discipline, you'll get better outcomes.
Thank you for that. Julio, thank you so much. It was a great presentation. And for our audience members who would like to learn more about your Leadership Academy and your corporation, would you mind putting in the chat your website, any contact information, so we could have that?
Yes, absolutely. My pleasure.
Thank you so much. All right, now we are moving on to our next speaker. First, I would like to offer an apology. I had incorrectly labeled our next speaker as an employee of Exxon, and I want to apologize to Rosane and to Exxon for that mistake. But I am glad that Rosane is here and she's able to join us. So let me tell you a little bit about our next speaker, Rosane Archery-McGowan. She is the co-chair of Climate Reality of Greater New Orleans chapter. She also participates with the newly formed Flamingo Funders. She is the founder and co-owner of Technical and Fabrication Resource. And since 2019, Rosane has been an investor with NOLA Angel Network, where she participates in screening and due diligence to evaluate early stage companies seeking investment. She is a trained chemical engineer, finance, and entrepreneurship professional. And as a consultant, she advised clients on project economics, redesigned biodiesel refinery, and led development of renewable projects. Please welcome Rosane Archery-McGowan. And Rosane, I am going to share your presentation. Give me just 1 second to load it, but we're so glad you're here.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me.
Okay. And Rosane, I just gave you slide control. so you are able to move about your presentation. Please let me know if you're able to access that.
I'm not seeing my presentation.
Oh, I'm sorry, I shared my screen. I'm sorry.
Thank
Here
you.
we go. Got you. So I'll go ahead and control your presentation for you. Please just let
Wonderful.
me know when to move forward.
Very good. So today I'd like to talk about the business incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act. Next slide, please. A little bit about myself, and as you've already heard, I currently co-chair Climate Reality Project, which is the organization that was started by Al Gore. It's a volunteer organization, almost 100%, and we're 45,000 volunteers across the globe who are educating people on climate change and encouraging them to take climate action and letting them know the steps that they can take. Next step, please. I thought I'd just throw this one in for a little bit of fun. One of my favorite things to do is dance and burn energy, and my favorite song is Rocking to September, Earth, Wind, and Fire, or anything Earth, Wind, and Fire. And I plan to still be doing that 30 years from now. Next slide, please. Except, according to NOAA and some of the latest projections, 30 years from now, my home would be underwater. So where I live is to the right of the, and as you can see, much of the area would be underwater. So this is a map that, a picture that I took off the NOAA website. Actually, it's originated at NOAA, but it was published in the Advocate, a local newspaper, about a year ago. And at the time, they were thinking that this would be a worst case scenario if we did nothing based off of the trajectory and emission rates today. But if you go on NOAA's website today, NOAA is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association. They're actually showing this as what they call high tide level on a normal day. This is a projection for 2100. They're saying that this is going to be normal high tide, daily high tide. And as you can see, what used to be a coastline way down to Fushan and across to Avery Island is all going to be under. Ranges that we're seeing. We're already beginning to see this. As today and this week and coming weeks, we're in New Orleans and along the Mississippi River dealing with seawater incursion. Seawater basically is intruding underneath the river water just because the river water flows are so low. And that's because there's so much drought, not just in the region, but all the way across the country in the Mississippi Valley. Next slide, please. So today, I'm going to talk about some of the steps that have been taken because we're seeing dramatic changes across our climate, and the forces around the world are beginning to act and to act quickly. One of the things that the United States has done is passed the Inflation Reduction Act. Inflation Reduction Act is pretty complex, and so I'll start by giving you an overview, and then I want to tunnel down into the elements of the Inflation Reduction Act related to energy security and climate action. After I've given you the high level of all the different components of relative to climate action in the Act, I'm going to drill down into some of the tools that are available, including the guidebook and a list of funding programs, as well as explain what Justice 40 is to help us find where the opportunities are for small businesses and for all businesses to take advantage of the opportunities that are being created, as well as to advance climate action and get some of these initiatives implemented as quickly as possible. I'll round up with key takeaways and a call to action. So the Inflation Reduction Act was enacted a little over a year ago and addresses several items. It starts off by talking about prescription drug prices and sets a ceiling for how much can be charged for drugs like insulin and epinephrine. It also extends the Affordable Care Act, which would have expired in 23 to 2025. The entire expenditures of the act are paid for and then some by imposing a minimum tax on corporations who have earnings more than $1 million. It also closes some tax loopholes. And so in all, it generates revenue of more than $760 billion, of which about $500 billion are allocated in spending, $369 billion of which is in energy security and climate action. So in all, it closes the deficit by $300 billion, because it's going to create a lot more funding than it spends. Next slide, please. So on the energy security front, it provides incentives for the production of clean energy, including geothermal energy, solar, wind, and nuclear. It provides incentives to sequester carbon in two fashions. One is in situ, or trapping carbon in air from the air, direct capture directly from the air. And the second one is by collecting industrial emissions of carbon and piping them and sequestering them underneath the ground. As far as clean fuels, it provides incentives to produce clean fuels like biodiesel and renewable diesel, as well as to produce sustainable aviation fuels. So sustainable aviation fuels are fuels that are made from biomass and other biomaterials that would otherwise be degraded back into recycled by natural processes or by burning into carbon in the atmosphere. The incentive for sustainable aviation fuel is $1.25 per gallon produced. In addition, and that's a tax credit that you would file at the end of the quarter. And that's in addition to you getting the value, being able to sell the aviation fuel for the value. So it's additive to your normal income or profits. And then for clean hydrogen, the incentive is 60 cents per kilogram of clean hydrogen produced. And that's hydrogen that's not produced from petroleum products or any other products, but produced from water using solar or clean energy in the process. Next slide, please. So the incentives take several different forms. Some of the incentives are in forms of grants that you would get through several different agencies, and I'll display some of them later on. Others are in forms of tax credits, like the production credits for clean fuels. There's also sometimes federal direct spending. For example, they'll be purchasing new aircraft, new Hurricane Hunter aircraft. And so the opportunities to get into some of the large federal spending programs. There's also direct federal spending for a number of different studies, coastline preservation studies, and ways to rejuvenate or help clean up some of the highly impacted communities that have had over the years sustained environmental impacts from heavy industry. There are also loans. Some of the loans may be partially forgiven, and in certain cases, there are rebates. Next slide, please. So on the energy efficiency front, there's several different programs related to homes and appliances, improving the efficiencies of homes and appliances. The appliances that are most targeted are HVAC, heating and cooling of homes and buildings. There's also incentives around clothes dryers and stoves, and they're basically looking for us to electrify as much as possible and to get away from gas for home heating and for stoves and for dryers. The primary technology that's advocated is heat pumps. And so the program is in two different phases. For people who have higher incomes, you're allowed to get tax credits. You file your taxes at the end of the year and you put all your appliances on that you have purchased, and you may be eligible for tax credit. For people who have lower incomes and are less likely to have taxes that would be or may not have any taxes payable at all, they've structured a program that they can apply through the estates to get grants and rebates to cover those costs, to cover the costs of getting heat pumps and getting your dryers and your stoves replaced. The challenge is that some of the states, and Florida is one of them, have decided not to go after the rebate program because the federal government is letting the states implement it just because it would be so hairy, such a huge program for the federal government to implement. So some of the states like Florida have, for political reasons, declined taking the funding from the federal government. And what's sad about Florida is that the state legislature actually approved the applications, but it's the governor at the highest level that has vetoed it, strictly for political reasons. But on the good side, CNN ran a story last week where they highlighted 25 state governors who met in New York City who are pushing hard and fast to get these home appliances and home efficiency programs in as quickly as possible. So they have a goal stated on the CNBC website of getting 20 million of these appliances in across the country as quickly as possible. On commercial buildings, there's similar provisions to bring commercial buildings to high energy efficiency standards to meet the LEED building standards, and also to replace HVAC systems. And then federal buildings, they also program to bring federal buildings up to code or to get them to the highest energy efficiency standards as possible. Next slide, please. There's additional investments in zero emission vehicles. The U.S. Postal Service will be replacing its entire fleet with high efficiency electric vehicles. There's incentives to replace heavy duty vehicles. These are primarily diesel vehicles that are used on roadways, as well as in ports and heavy port equipment that's used to move containers on and off ships. And there's additionally incentives to build and install equipment to collect the exhaust from ships while they are docked. And that's because ships got to oftentimes provide their own power even while they're docked. And so they'll keep their engines running in order to do that. Zero emission technologies for tribal and low income communities. You'll see when you go through the act that there's numerous places in which the low income communities and tribal communities are elevated, and zero emission technologies are one area. Air quality monitoring, there's incentives to have community-based air quality monitors in areas that are heavily industrialized. There's incentives or funds allocated to address air pollution at schools, especially the older schools and the schools that are located within very heavily industrialized areas. There's funds for environmental justice and for environmental justice block grants. So to do studies and to do corrective action plans, to suggest corrective action plans, and then also to implement corrective action plans to get environmental justice communities, which are communities in highly industrialized areas, remediated so that their emissions are more normalized. And then methane emission reduction programs would also be funded. Methane is one of the worst greenhouse gases. It is 84 times more potent as a greenhouse gas as carbon dioxide is. Next slide, please. In addition, the Act encourages and incentivizes forest restoration, just because we know that forests and trees, plants absorb carbon dioxide from the air and hold it there for a very long time. And these programs are extended through the National Park and Public Land Conservation departments. Energy and water efficiency and climate resilience for affordable housing. There's a lot of focus on, like I said, on lower income communities and trying to get their housing, even public housing and low income housing, Section 8 housing, up to par and get it all very efficient. On the conservation, restoration, and conservation of marine habitats and coastal communities. Like I showed you on that map, a lot of the coastline is very, very vulnerable. And so they're looking at ways to protect the coastline beyond what we have today. A lot of communities in those coastlines, as well as a lot of land, industry, and people that we need to be concerned about. And so they're looking there's several different initiatives that are on the table. Some of them are looking at ways to build communities that may be able to almost float, where, you know, the housing, and you have little villages that would be placed on pontoons, sort of like a pontoon boat, but built on top of pontoons and be able to rise and lower with the tide, as well as looking at extending levees and a number of other initiatives. On the weather and climate research and forecasting, like I said, they're looking at purchasing additional airplanes. They're also looking at purchasing supercomputers and at paying people to build more robust, more detailed, and higher accuracy models. As you've seen in recent years, it seems like their models are pretty accurate as far as the path of hurricanes, but because the climate conditions are quite different from when the models were built for the data that was used over the last decades to build the models, it seems a lot of times that the models are not forecasting the strength accurately. And over the last 2-3 years, a lot of times within the day or 2 days of the storms making landfall, hurricanes making landfall, they're actually realizing that they're going to be much stronger than they had said 4 or 5 days earlier. They're looking at advanced technology, vehicle manufacturing, to make it more efficient. There's a lot, and not just on the vehicle side, but in all heavy industry when it comes to metals manufacturing. Metals manufacturing is pretty energy intense because of the smelting processes that goes into aluminum, steel, etc. But looking at advancing vehicle manufacturing and also going to more public transit and more widely available public transit. For electricity transmission, because they're looking at so much investment in renewable electricity, including offshore wind, more wind farms, more solar farms, they're going to need to get that electricity to the end users. And so electricity transmission is a big focus. And then advanced industrial facilities that are less energy intensive and have lower greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. So let's talk about some of the tools that are available to help us understand how to find what's available for businesses, especially small businesses, to participate in implementing the Inflation Reduction Act. So what I have here is a screenshot of the Inflation Reduction Act guidebook, and it's available on whitehouse.gov. I'll provide a link towards the end of the presentation. What it has is a list of all the different expenditures that are anticipated on the Inflation Reduction Act. And when you click on any one of those, it'll give you a program description, a period of availability, and then it goes on to tell you who's the program's through, how much is available, what the mechanism is, and so on. And so it's one of the very easy tools to help us businesses figure out where the opportunities are and begin to go after them. Next slide, please. The Justice 40 initiative is an initiative that was signed by President Biden just a few days after he took office. And it says that 40% of the overall benefits of certain programs will be focused at communities that have historically been disadvantaged and underserved. And there's a tool that's used. It's the environmental justice tool that you put in your zip code, and it tells you whether or not you're one of these communities that are a part of the focus of this program. And so Justice 40 is allocating 40%, not only of the Inflation Reduction Act, but also of two previous major acts that were passed, and those are the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the American Rescue Plan. And so when I look at this, I know that they focused on these communities and making sure that 40% of the investment reaches the communities. I'm actually aware that they've assembled focus groups in these communities and have people that they're interviewing, that they have participating in the process. I'm familiar with a few people from the river parishes who are traveling to Washington, D.C. periodically. These are community people to make sure that their voices are heard in the solutions that are brought to their communities. What I'm not aware of is if and how businesses are participating in this, because I'm thinking that it should not just be that 40% of the benefits get delivered to the communities, but I would also like to see that a large percentage, 40% would be great, but not just, if not 40%, a substantial percentage of minority and disadvantaged businesses to get to participate in actually delivering these benefits, so that we are not just a benefactor, but also get to participate in the business and the wealth building side of delivering these initiatives and taking advantage of these three very substantial laws that are being implemented. Next slide, please. So abundant opportunities, but time is of the essence. So we don't have too much time to think about how we're going to participate. We need to put together some plans pretty quickly. And next slide, please. Here's why. The money is being allocated pretty rapidly. Here's a quote from the Rocky Mountain Institute. It says that within the past year, the initiatives of the IRA are actually being implemented faster than they had expected, than the people who developed the law had expected. And to date, 278 billion of clean energy investments have been announced. And an additional 70 billion was announced just last month. And that's an additional 70 billion to the funding that had already been allocated. But the point here is that the money is going quickly, and that we need to participate. We need to figure out where we want to participate and begin to organize our thoughts and our actions around that. Next slide, please. Here I wanted to list some of the resources that are available, and provide you the links. So I showed you a snapshot of the guidebook. What I didn't show you was a list of the funding programs. On the same website, the whitehouse.gov webpage, where you find the guidebook, just above the guidebook is a link to the funding programs. The funding program, list of funding programs, is a massive Excel sheet that lists, just like the guidebook did, every program, describes the program, tells you the end date, tells you a lot of information about how to participate. It's a lot more detailed than the guidebook is. It gives a very robust description of each program. There's the link to the Justice 40 initiative. And then there's numerous different agencies that are charged with providing the funding, including Department of Energy, the EPA, the Department of Transportation, NOAA. And so if you're interested in any one of these programs and you're not sure how to participate, I would start by going to your economic development offices, either at the local or state or federal levels, and they'll be able to guide you as to how to get into programs. So if you want to participate on the HVAC side, or making buildings more energy efficient, they'll be able to guide you on how to get started. Next slide, please. So we're at a pivot point. I just went through a whole pretty comprehensive list of different initiatives that are underway. And you would think that if we want to implement all of this, we should be in pretty good standing. But what the experts are saying is, if we implement everything that's in the Inflation Reduction Act, that'll only get us to a 40% reduction by 2050. 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from where we are now. We really need to be at net zero, which means that we're taking our carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere as quickly as we're taking it in. And we're not there yet. We don't have the full plan that gets us there. We do have what is a pretty good start, but not the full thing. What I think the big gap is that it's still the part that's hardest to address is changing our own practices. How much we drive, what our communities look like. And one of the things that I didn't talk about in the Inflation Reduction Act is that it does talk about making communities more walkable. But I think, that's a big opportunity, is to, we're going to really need to rethink how we live our lives on a daily basis to really get the emissions down where we need to. We need to be thinking more in terms of what Europe is doing as far as creating a circular economy, and that nothing goes in the trash, because all the trash that we dump in landfills, much of that gets broken down into methane, especially all the organic matter, including textiles. All of that ends up in as carbon dioxide, or methane, actually. When it breaks down in the absence of oxygen, it results in methane. It breaks down in the presence of oxygen, then it results in carbon dioxide. And so we have a lot of opportunities. I'd love to see us get in on this, but there's still more to be done. Next slide, please. But all working together, I'm confident that we can get it done. And the time to go is now. Thank you. My email and phone is attached for anybody who'd like to contact me.
Thank you so much, Rosane. That was a great presentation. So you spoke a little bit about the circular economy of what they're doing in Europe. As you know, minority businesses, small businesses, how can we participate? What kind of roles can we do, or what can we do as small businesses participate in a circular economy? What can we do on our level?
So small businesses do a lot of purchasing. We need to be begin with the end in mind when we design whatever products or services we plan to offer. And so things like product packaging and making sure that the packaging is something that can be recycled. Minimizing or avoiding using plastic in our packaging. We're using, paper that's going to be paper products or cardboard products that are going to be easily recycled. So not using too much painting or plastic overlay on them. But really thinking end in mind when we design our products.
The design phase starting early. So these seem like, minor changes, but to the small business who has to pay for these changes, do you see, a big cost in these changes, in changing on how we package?
It can be a big cost depending on what's your product. So I think, most, if you look at cosmetics, for example, a lot of them today are in types of plastics that are not recyclable. Mm-hmm. And so going to either plastics that may be recyclable or degradable that today could be a substantial cost, but hopefully in a few years it won't be, because there are companies that are looking at plastics that will be able to degrade in a matter of years. Or not degrade, but can be composted in a matter of years.
Gotcha. We do have a question from James Bridgers. He asks, what are the opportunities with utility companies, substations in particular?
That's a great question. And I'm going to have to direct you to the tools that I just said. I would be glad to do some research on my own and help you follow up. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. Mm-hmm. I do know that there's a big initiative as far as, solar in particular, and I guess also wind. One of the things that the IRA brings in almost to every program is job training and making sure that people are getting equitable wages. And so if you wanted to participate, you could contact whoever's running the program that you're interested in and figure out how it is that you get your people or your teams, one, job trained, and then two, to be able to participate as a contractor on those programs. Even if you're not able to participate as a primary contractor, you ought to be able to participate as a secondary or tertiary contractor. And so that's one of the reasons that I wanted to highlight some of those very big programs, because sometimes we overlook them thinking that that's too big for us, but we need to be looking for ways that we can participate. And much like Julio just reminded us, we got to believe, and we got to not be daunted by the obstacles, but by looking for a way that we can find a solution.
Absolutely. I want to go back to the climate reality that you co-chair. You mentioned that it was 100% volunteer. Is this an organization to where you're looking for volunteers? Can our audience members who want to participate or find out more, is this something that we could could, I guess, sign up for or be a part of? And tell us a little more about that.
Absolutely. Yes, it is an organization that welcomes everyone. We have people from all walks of life, and it's interesting how almost everybody finds a role that works for them. Myself being having a chemistry background and having a scientific background, I work mostly on the scientific side, but I also work alongside community organizers and people who are good, some of them from a teaching background, who get it explaining stuff and providing presentations, talking to the community. We have several different, the way we organize our local chapter is that we have several different committees. Some are focused on policy and legislation, and more on the scientific side, making sure that it's good policy that's been recommended and that it's written in a way that's not easy, but feasible to implement it. Mm-hmm. We have others who are on the education side, explaining to people exactly what climate change is and the small and not so small steps they can take in their daily lives to make a difference. We have community outreach that works in conjunction with other organizations, especially where we have common goals, to make sure that we're communicating and pulling in the same direction at the same time. So we had a small part in the IRA because we were calling our legislators first, kind of figuring out exactly what what provisions needed to be in, and kind of following the development of the bill as it went through its different evolution stages, and then especially in the final stages, calling our legislators, the White House, writing letters, emailing, and encouraging them to get it across the finish line. So yes, we also right now are very active on getting out the vote, because we know that climate is not a priority for all legislators, and so we encourage people to make sure that what matters to them is actually being represented in Congress and in their local and state governments. And so we're doing a nonpartisan get out the vote campaign very actively, phone banking, just people across the board, and ensuring that they get out the vote and make sure that their voices are heard. Absolutely. So lots of opportunities, and yes, I would love to connect with anybody. We have a chapter in New Orleans, which is about 130 people strong. We have 25 to 40 people who participate very actively, and we're gifted to have a climate scientist on board. He's actually not in New Orleans, but he trained because Al Gore conducts the training. This is a organization that was started by Al Gore, and he still trains climate leaders several times a year. My training was remote, but they actually have in-person trainings. So he trained in a cohort of people that started the New Orleans chapter, and so he participates with us. But we also have people out of Dallas and somebody in Germany who participates with us on a regular basis. But yeah, the climate scientist out of Seattle updates us regularly, like when there's a Pacific River or very cold winters and we're freezing. He basically gives us an update as to exactly what's going on. He is actively watching the big glaciers in Antarctica that are beginning to thaw very rapidly. And yeah, it's very interesting. And then myself, we have a former state assistant secretary of environmental quality, and we have former EPA and CDC person who's very involved in helping with the climate justice
Very resourceful group, I see. Wow.
Yes.
Well, for the audience members who want to find out more and participate, would you mind dropping your website or email contact in the chat just so we have that as well?
Sure.
And because you had links on your presentation, we would like to share your presentation with our audience members who would like more information on the Justice 40 and the Inflation Reduction Act as well. Great resources to have.
Thank
You so
you.
much, Rosane.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate you.
All
Thanks,
right.
everyone.
I see we have our next speaker, Charlotte Shaw, on. I'm very excited to hear Charlotte present her today. So let me, okay. So a little bit about Charlotte Shaw. Charlotte serves as the Executive Director, CEO of the Birmingham-Jefferson County Transit Authority. Ms. Shaw has over 25 years of experience in various industries in both private and public sectors, including her extensive background in public transit. I had the wonderful opportunity to hear her speak in Birmingham a couple months ago, and I was just blown away by kind of her idea of a 15-minute community. She's held various leadership positions in AE and construction contracts, operations, capital improvement planning, and program project delivery. Prior to her role as CEO, she was appointed by the mayor of Birmingham as the Deputy Director of Special Projects to deliver the city's first bus rapid transit, which recently launched and is known as BX Birmingham Express. She was also recently credited with the successful design and implementation of public transportation for national dignitaries, visitors, and spectators during the World Games 2022, while maintaining regular service. Ms. Shaw is known for being a compassionate and passionate leader who is also insightful and innovative. Give me just a moment to pull up Charlotte's presentation. All right, we are ready to rock and roll. And Charlotte, I will be controlling your presentation. So please let me know when you're ready to move on to the next slide.
Okay, sounds good. Well, first of all, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm always elated with the opportunity to talk about new ways that cities are preparing for the future. And 15-minute cities is one of those ways. So again, thank you so much. And I look forward to having a conversation on this. I'm going to talk just for a little bit so we can have a serious back and forth conversation with the people on the call. So you can take me to the next slide. And so we'll talk about a little bit about what this slide means and how it introduces the 10 to 15 minute. I should have put 10 to 15-minute city. It's not a new concept, really. It's historical, and I don't have a lot of time to get back and how cities started and talk about the historical nature. But we're really just kind of going back in time, so to speak. So we're going back to the future to introduce what we used to do prior to the invention of the automobile, which wasn't a bad thing. And so introducing the automobile helped expand us in areas at the time of that industrial revolution during that period that we didn't know. And so as new inventions always create new opportunities, but what happens over years, culture changes and so does environments. And so we have to change with those cultures and those environments that create either more opportunity for us or create bottlenecks because of it. And so we are always living, we're always learning. And many people don't agree. There's some people who don't agree with the 15-minute city. They think it limits freedom and it limits people or either the government is trying to control how we actually create cities. And that is not true at all. What it does is it gives opportunities for choices. So you can take me to the next slide and we'll get into the characteristics. And so let's talk about what a 15-minute city is. So really what the characteristics are, it helps us to live and work and play in our environments together. It creates green environments, not just green emissions, around electric vehicles. And I know you hear a lot now about those electric vehicles, but it builds communities around people and not cars. And so what that means is that we are no longer car-centric. We can become community-centric and improve our path to networks and prioritize the way we move around the city, the way it makes us mobile, right? I'm a living example of what it means to live in a 15-minute city. I run the transit authority, but I use public transit. I can walk to the grocery store. I can walk to my doctor's office, which is very close to where I live. I walk across the street to my office. So, I wanted to make sure that I was living what I was trying to create in terms of an environment where people come together as a community. And so city urban planners are now moving to where we are expanding sidewalks and we're increasing infrastructure for better safety, because again, we have accidents and there are safety concerns around pedestrians and cars, and not that we try to eliminate that. We just try to give people an option on how they want to spend their time now with their families and not spend all this time commuting back and forth to work and being stressed by the environment of how they get around. And it's proven that actually, 43% of walkable communities lend to greater health. People tend to have physical targets that they want to achieve by these steps that they're trying to get in now with all these different watches and Apple watches that manage your steps. And so if you live and work, and it's proven in these communities, and choose to drive when you want to, not because you have to, and not because you rely on automobiles, but because it's a choice you make. But at least you can gain back some of your time for social benefits that we used to have with our families that we don't get to have anymore because of congestion. And so it lends to just a great economic development opportunity, not just in various neighborhoods, but in your neighborhood. And so you're going to find that, and you may already see where economic development is growing in our cities. We're creating mixed-use housing, and we're combining housing and parks and cultural events with where we live. And so, mixed use just gives opportunity for more equitable housing for people to live connected and together. And so this 15-minute city gives you greater access to, transit, which is what I represent. And this is one of the reasons I encourage this type of methodology so much, because it really does lend itself to more community, more transit modes of operation, where you can just jump on microtransit on demand, catch Uber and Lyft, and even public transportation services like bus rapid transit systems that now run right through neighborhoods with faster services and more reliability. It gives you greater access to childcare in your community. You don't have to drive so far after you leave work to pick up your children, so that you have more time with them in the evenings. It lends greater access to jobs right in your communities. If you choose to work in your communities, lends greater opportunities for dining experiences. I walk often 2 or 3 times a week just to have dinner at my favorite restaurants around my community. I live in the downtown area, which has experienced quite a bust lately in the Birmingham area. It lends for greater safety, which I've already discussed, and even healthcare. We're finding that healthcare is not expanding or extending itself away from communities anymore. They are housing themselves right where you live. And I'll show you this later in my presentation, how we, even at the Transit Authority, have an opportunity to develop a mixed-use, services-oriented development on top of our central station, which will possibly house a doctor's office and a place where you can work and have conferences and dining experience and all those different things. And then education. Education is also important to these communities. Many people live on the outskirts because of education and the limit and the restrictions around good education. But and this doesn't discount suburbia, okay? These 15-minute communities are in urban areas and suburban areas. And I think early planners, when the automobile took place, thought that they could separate housing from all the appointments and from all the experiences that people would need to, or all the services that people would need to be a part of their family. And they found that separating those services has made it very difficult for people to get back and forth to necessities. Even grocery stores, you hear food deserts, and that's because, many people drive just to grocery stores. But if you had the opportunity to walk to your grocery store, you wouldn't have to stock up so much, even in the house, for waste. And so this trickles down a lot in a lot of industries and areas to help increase our living and expand our services where they're needed, and to interconnect communities and connect communities. And so you'll see on the left side of this slide, it kind of gives you what that looks like in terms of a 10 to 15 or 15-minute city. You have all with the pendulum in the middle, but look at all these opportunities where you can walk. We have better pedestrian sidewalks for our physically challenged people who need better sidewalks and ADA accessible sidewalks, and even access to great restaurants where they can just also mobilize themselves to get to where they might want to go. Bicycle routes and have been introduced in cities, bike-only lanes, to help with that walkable city. And that walkable city just makes it very convenient for everybody to be able to experience shopping and everything else that they need as part of the services. And so you can take me to the next slide. And so really, what is it about that makes a walkable city? Well, we commute differently. We don't rely on the automobile anymore. Transit is key in those daily commutes. And like I mentioned, we're not trying to exclude cars, because you should have the option to choose to drive or not, and drive when it's socially convenient. Like I like to take road trips to various cities and to history museums. And I like my road trips because it gives me an opportunity to stop and see different museums and arts that I like to see. But that's an option for me. In my daily life, however, I like the convenience of a shorter commute. I like the convenience of walking around a community and getting to know people in my area. I like the ideal of a greenery missions, that when I walk, I don't have to worry about smelling all the various pollutants because of all the cars. And so it's really about the connections, it's about the connectivity, it's about the economic development, and it's about all the infrastructure changes that we see are taking places. So we don't have to be reliant on cars. It's about human-centric urban planning, right? That's not overshadowed by the dominance of cars, not overshadowed by the way we have normally, and especially in the United States, the way we have created our environments. And I can tell you, foreign countries are already moved or have already moved to these walkable cities. And so it's just about fostering really, stronger communities to reduce congestion. And I'm from it, I lived in Atlanta for almost 40 years. And I can tell you, living in Atlanta, whenever I go out in traffic now, I really have to just get my mind together to really drive in Atlanta's traffic, and especially on the freeways, because I'm usually there on an hour just to get from point A to point B, from my origin to my destination. So now that I'm in Birmingham and I live and work in my community, it saves me a lot of money. It enhances my well-being. And so it's just an opportunity for me to have an option to drive in. And it really embraces our sustainability over time, right? Our health over time. And so all of these things make a difference in how we now relate as people, as in an environment that fosters family, that fosters sustainability, that fosters safety. And you can take me to the next slide. And so I would be remiss if I didn't talk about transportation at all, because see, for over the last, I say 60 years, there's been this stigma to public transit, but public transit is a very big part of these 15-minute communities, because now it's not just about the big buses, the 35-foot buses that hold 60 people. That's an option for people who may need it. It is an option for people who make a choice to get from point A to point B. But there's so many other modes of transportation now to help foster these cities, right? Cities are introducing bus-only lanes. We're introducing microtransit now, where you can actually just pick up a phone and you can get into a very small van with 8 other passengers, or maybe 1 or 2. They're zone related, and they're not reservationist or it's a shared ride, so to speak. But then there are reservationist ride. You can get Uber, you can get Lyft. Of course, and some of you who live in cities where you have heavy rail, there's commuter rail. And we are introducing to the United States, we're trying to introduce high-speed rail, where not only we can commute in our cities, but we can commute from state to state, across state lines a lot quicker, within 45 minutes to an hour. Imagine living in Alabama and spending 45 minutes on a high-speed rail just to get to Georgia or Florida, for that matter, or to the beach. So, transportation is changing. Transportation is rapidly growing, and it's intensifying the way we move around neighborhoods and the way we are changing relationships with families. So don't think of public transit now just as a bus service. And there's this misnomer that only people that use it are poor people and people who are reliant on public transit. But that is no further than the truth, because what happens if we all use it, if we all can have an option or a choice, that means it can serve a purpose even in your families, in your households. And so we can go to the next slide. And so this is an example of where our transit company and what we're doing in the community to help with that walkable city. And this is a futuristic concept that we're preparing, and it's not that far in the future, because we're actually preparing for the design of this right now. My central station does not look like this, and I wish I had a previous picture of my central station, but it is a 1-story building, and that's it. It just houses my buses coming in and out to service the community. But this particular building is what we're working toward to service the community with a 15-minute possibility. And so what you see here is our central station that will continue to house our buses coming in and out, but it also will introduce mixed-use housing. It will have doctor's offices in there. It'll have possibly a restaurant where people can come. We're even looking at having a service center for automobiles. So if somebody needs to get to work, but you don't have to rely on your car getting you there because it's having some mechanical issues, you can leave it for the day and then get on the bus or get a ride from that service to get you where you need to be. And so this is just an example of what cities are doing in neighborhoods. This sits right in the middle of downtown. Right next door is my office. On the opposite side of the street, which you don't see here. But I wanted to give you an idea of where we're going, where cities are going, and even public transportation systems. We're not the same. So I always say we're not just a bus company anymore. I get to now help communities develop mixed-use housing, equitable housing, transportation, walkable communities with green space, parks. Right behind this building is what's called Railroad Park. And that's a park where a lot of people walk to every day, daily. Go to that park and walk around the trail, go and have lunch with their friends, and activities and physical fitness programs are often held in that park. I actually go with my dog at least once or twice a week. And so I just wanted to give an example of where we're going, what that looks like, and then have a conversation with people who may not understand exactly how these cities are moving in that direction. And not only is this urban planning, but this is just planning, city planning in general now. We're finding, you know, urban planners used to separate, but now we're finding from these city planners that they're connecting all of these different services. You want your appointments and your reservations and all of your necessities in one place. And so as we look forward to the future, look forward to communities that you thrive in and communities that are set around you and not set around your automobile. So I'll entertain any questions anybody may have.
That's great. Thank you, Charlotte. So I do have a question. You know, I am seeing a lot of mixed use developments popping up. My home base is Jackson, Mississippi, and you know, there is a bus service here. There is rail between Jackson and New Orleans. We can get to New Orleans on the Amtrak still. You know, 4-hour commute. Are we seeing this? Are you seeing this mixed use development even kind of in the middle parts of the country? You know, where it's more rural, more open space. Is this something that's also popping up other than just in our backyards?
Absolutely. Even rural America, because what we're finding, and I think what research has shown is that a lot of the people who leave their homes are finding themselves going back to where they grew up, and that's where they want to live and raise their families. And so even rural America now is developing and having an economic development boom in their areas. They may be smaller, but nevertheless, they're having those because they're finding that the people who are moving back want access to all of the things we have the advantage of having in urban areas. And so really, it's not any different from rural America or suburbia than it is for urban. The concept and the methodology is the same because people want access to their communities and things that are going on in their communities. They want to be able to enjoy them right where they are.
Yeah. So for our audience who are mainly small businesses, you know, with these new developments, I can only imagine the type of new business opportunities that would arise. Can you talk a little bit about the types of business opportunities that would come up from developments such as that?
Well, you know, and it varies. Business development and opportunities vary depending on the small business. You can probably participate as part of the design, concept, and construction if you are a company who is looking for clients to be able to service your organization. And so, or you can, if you have a retail store, I would suggest getting into a community that is doing exactly what I'm talking about today, because it's those communities that will thrive and people will walk in and out of your store based on their ability and easy accessibility to get to those type of businesses. So it's a change in how America is looking at doing business and working with companies for various reasons. And so it just depends on what those offerings are. But I can tell you, whether you're given an offering in terms of being a construction company, A&E firm, a program management company, or whether you're retail where you're looking to sell some type of commodity or service, know the community and where the community is going, and definitely get in on the ground floor of this economic development, because it will expand and be expansive in so many ways. Work with companies like the Transit Authority, the City of Birmingham, the cities, work with companies who are doing exactly what I'm talking about, because when you see these developments go up, it's usually part of a bigger plan.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Get with your cities and get with the people in these small business offices, get with those procurement and contracts departments, and find out what's going on through local ads, through infrastructure changes from the federal government. Review all of those opportunities and put yourselves in a position where you can benefit.
Yeah, keep your ears to the ground.
Yeah.
I know those stories from economic development agencies are, you know, they want to tout their newest and latest projects. So from that, opportunities can arise. Right.
Yeah, call them up.
Mm.
You know, if you don't have access to them now, you know, find out from these cities who is running these economic development offices, and call them until you get to a person who you
Mhm.
can talk with and meet with to
No,
see what
absolutely.
opportunities are available. Mhm.
Gotcha. So yes, very interesting. I love hearing about economic development, especially from our agency and from our angle and
Yeah,
viewpoint. We strive to help our members in our communities and our MBEs. So
yeah,
thank you,
yeah,
Charlotte.
yes.
All right, and that wraps up day 3. Charlotte, would you mind putting your information into the chat in case anybody wants
Oh,
to find out
sure.
more about 50 Minutes Community and how they can contact their local agencies about any opportunities that could come about? So that wraps up day 3, building sustainable communities. Please come back tomorrow and join us for our final day of Pivot Week. Tomorrow is the attack on affirmative action. And with that, I would like to give you back your lunch break. Have a good Wednesday afternoon, everyone.